Coming up, we have some really cool planes, really cool weapons, and exploding ships. What's not to like about that? Next on Maximus. Well, there's been a lot of hype about China's advanced anti-ship ballistic missiles that threaten naval vessels operating in the Indo-Pacific waters, notably the U.S. Navy's nuclear-powered supercarriers. And China boasts that the range of those weapons could deny access to the U.S. and other allied warships in the South China Sea as well as other surrounding Pacific international waters. However, if all that bluster was meant to intimidate the United States, well then Beijing failed, because the United States is developing its own anti-ship weapon, and surprisingly they are using rather old technology to do it. And as it turns out, I guess you can teach an old dog a new trick. And recently the U.S. put its new old low-cost new ship obliterating weapon to the test. In July, the Air Force tested a new ship-killing guided bomb to publicly demonstrate the U.S. military's continuously developing ability to sink enemy vessels quickly. So it's not hard to see why they named their new boat-buster bomb the Quicksink. But make no mistake about it, this was a message aimed directly at China, especially when it comes to its desires for Taiwan. But like I said, this old but currently improved ship-sinking weapon was specifically developed to take out as many aircraft carriers as China is willing to lose. Much of the emphasis on anti-ship ordnance recently has gone to ballistic missiles and hypersonic weapons, where the speed and kinetic force of hypersonic missiles mean that an explosive warhead might not be required to do significant damage to a warship such as an aircraft carrier. But that's only if the missile strike hits their target. However, experts suggest that could be far more difficult than it sounds. The Pacific Ocean is gigantic, and carriers, although large, are also fast, and almost always surrounded by a carrier strike group. That includes guided missile destroyers specifically designed to counter incoming threats. So due to those hurdles, efforts are underway to develop directed energy weapons, including lasers, that could counter missiles and drones. But even as the U.S. continues to develop hypersonic missiles and lasers, it is now, as I said, teaching their old dogs to do new tricks with an old-school anti-ship approach by simply using gravity bombs dropped by aircraft. After all, it worked effectively during World War II to send the Imperial Japanese carriers to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, so why couldn't they do the same to China's new carriers? In the July test, the Air Force Research Laboratory, the AFRL, launched a B-2 Spirit bomber that released the weapon, which the AFRL calls the aptly named Quicksink, against an empty cargo vessel in the Gulf of Mexico. Regarding the Quicksink weapon, the AFRL head of Munitions Directorate at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, Colonel Matthew Casper, said that this new technology will ensure that the U.S. can defend its interests, keep the seas open, and seize the initiative over large maritime areas. Quicksink is an answer to an urgent need to neutralize maritime threats to freedom around the world. Translation: China, we're talking to you. The Air Force is developing Quicksink to bolster its anti-ship capabilities, which would be crucial in a potential conflict with China or another major adversary. American defense leaders have repeatedly said that the U.S.'s military top challenge is China, which views the island nation of Taiwan as a breakaway province with which it must reunify with Mother China, or China will do it by force, most likely through an armed and violent invasion. But a war against China would likely involve fierce naval battles across the Pacific, and the Air Force hopes Quicksink would provide another weapon to its arsenal to counter the Chinese Navy. The Quicksink program will allow the Air Force to modify current or future weapons to hit targets at sea that are either stationary or moving. In 2021, it began testing the concept. The AFRL said that it wants the weapons to home in on specific points on the target vessel, including at its top, the waterline, or just below the water's surface. The AFRL did not specify which weapon was used in the July 2024 test to almost instantly sink the cargo vessel called the Monarch Countess. A previous test in July 2022 used a modified GPS-guided GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack Munitions, or JDAM, to strike a target vessel. However, the JDAM does not operate under its own power and uses fins to steer it towards its target. However, it's the speed of the releasing aircraft and gravity that provide the weapon's velocity. In a 2021 interview with military.com, the AFRL said that the JDAM's nose plug had been redesigned as part of this effort. That was done to ensure the JDAM does not careen off in an unexpected direction if it hits the water before striking its target, which an AFRL official compared that occurrence to a stone skipping across a pond surface. While the Air Force hopes Quicksink would have a similar ship-killing effect as a traditional torpedo, this weapon would not travel under the water's surface to the target. More importantly, Air Force officials say Quicksink would be cheaper and more flexible than heavyweight torpedoes, and could be released from most of the surface combat aircraft in the U.S. arsenal. A B-2 bomber carried out July's test, and an F-15E Strike Eagle released a GBU-31 JDAM that had been modified into a maritime Quicksink weapon in a previous test in 2022. However, analysts say a Quicksink launch from a B-2 would give China's People's Liberation Army Navy, called the PLAN, much to consider in the event of any possible conflict in the Western Pacific, including around hotspots like Taiwan, the Philippines, and the southern islands of Japan. Carl Schuster, former head of the U.S. Pacific Command Joint Intelligence Center, said, "It's very significant, saying the B-2 demonstrated anti-maritime capabilities that will constrain, if not deter, China's operations east of Taiwan or off the Philippines." Schuster added that you cannot ignore a weapon that can sink a 25,000-plus ton ship instantly with just one hit. While in any conflict close to its home shores, China on paper holds a distinct advantage. It has thousands of missiles on the Chinese mainland, the world's largest navy to dominate nearby seas, and the ability to provide air cover to those ships from land-based aircraft. But the U.S. stealth B-2 bomber and other delivery systems could negate some of China's advantages with long-range fire, analysts say. It extends the range at which potential enemies can be held at risk through advanced weapons while retaining a considerable degree of stealth. And Alessio Palatano, professor of war and strategy at King's College in London, says, "It basically demonstrates that you are not safe no matter where you are in the Pacific." And finally, AFRL's Munitions Directorate is working with the Navy on a maritime weapon program to develop air-launched weapons so they can sink enemy ships. So China would do well to go back and read their history books, because there was another Pacific superpower in the last century that had a bigger navy than the U.S. and specifically more aircraft carriers. Sure, things are awesome in Japan 80 years later, but it's a lesson their former military leaders learned the hard way. Just saying. So how about that? I don't know about you, but I won't be riding on any Chinese aircraft carriers anytime soon. How about you? Please be sure to like and comment before you go. But of course, you know that I won't know until you let me know down below. And as always, until next time, this is Maximus.